When I was in middle school, I was obsessed with Degrassi, The Next Generation. I cannot overstate this. I recorded every episode that aired onto VHS tapes until I had every episode of the series up to that point at my fingertips. I made my friends watch it for hours, trying to explain why it was such a huge deal that Ashley decided to take ecstasy at her party. So today, y'all are going to be my friends, and I'm going to talk about Degrassi. A few things. This is a retrospective, and this series is kind of big, and I have a lot to say, so I'm breaking it up. This first video is about Degrassi Jr. High, and already it's an incomplete retrospective. There are actually 2 series that take place before this, and I'm not covering them for a reason, so let's just jump right in. Part 1. Degrassi history. In the 1970s and 80s, network television stations took note of an untapped market of teenagers. Unsupervised and home alone, these so-called latchkey kids were a prime demographic for the late afternoon, early evening hours, time slots usually taken up by low-revenue local programming. Taking note, the story goes, that they began airing content specifically designed to appeal to those teens, talking about issues that they faced in their modern worlds. The creation of these, what would become known as after-school specials, is usually attributed to Martin Tossi, who produced more than 20 of these teen dramas. His primary goal was creating believable, realistic scenarios that teens and kids might experience in their everyday lives. Stories that wouldn't be solved by an adult stepping in and fixing everything. He said in a 2006 interview with the Boston Globe, the kid had to resolve the problem by him or herself. Though Tossi set the standard, many would soon follow, and after-school specials soon became not the name of a television show, but its own genre, a teen drama, usually involving a serious or heavy issue like pregnancy, addiction, or self-harm, meant to appeal to a teen audience. Anyone who has ever watched a single episode of Degrassi can see the fingerprints of the after-school special all over that thing. Created in 1979 by Kit Hood and Linda Schuyler, Degrassi is the umbrella term for a franchise of teen drama television, spanning 5 TV shows, but starting, unsurprisingly, with 4 after-school specials. Those 4 specials would become the first 4 episodes of the first Degrassi series, The Kids of Degrassi Street. So if this is a retrospective, why am I not talking about The Kids of Degrassi Street? The main reason is that it's hard to find. Almost every episode of Degrassi is available in an official capacity on YouTube, including the old series, but there are a few missing pieces, the main one being The Kids of Degrassi Street. The second reason is that I don't really consider The Kids of Degrassi Street to be part of the Degrassi canon. I don't know if saying this is blasphemy or something, but Degrassi is known for being a teen drama series, and The Kids of Degrassi Street deals with, well, kids. And there's nothing wrong with that, but the stories and audience skew younger than what Degrassi would eventually come to mean, so I consider it more of a predecessor than part of the Degrassi canon. And canon, by the way, is the third reason. The Degrassi franchise all takes place in the same universe. Characters from junior high and high show up in The Next Generation, and even the Netflix series Next Class makes references to past events, while also breaking the fourth wall by talking about Drake, but let's not get into my nitpicks, we're just not there yet. The Kids of Degrassi Street is not a part of that, I guess. Like, some of the actors in it play different characters in later series. For example, Wheels, who would play a major character in both junior high and high school and even have a cameo in The Next Generation. It's hard for me to consider Griff existing in the same universe as Wheels. I'm even backed up by the Wikipedia here, which says, despite being the next series in the franchise and starring some of the same actors, Degrassi Jr. High is not considered a sequel show. So there. All that said, if it ever shows up on YouTube, I might talk about it again as its own thing. I'm just a sucker for more Degrassi always. Regardless of how I felt about it, Kids of Degrassi Street was a huge success, winning awards and garnering both critical and fan praise. At the series' conclusion, the creators announced that the show would be moving on to a new era, junior high. Part 2. The making of. Before heading up the first teen drama aimed at adolescents, Linda Schuyler was a middle school teacher. This would have a huge impact on the show, affecting not just the stories they told, but also the way they told them. Degrassi Junior High started their open auditions in May of 1986. Over 300 Canadian teenagers were auditioned. Schuyler wanted her teens to look like teens, not models or adults. They all had to take acting lessons throughout the run of the show. Those who were selected became part of what was known as the Repertory Company, or the Repco. This was a company of actors members that basically made up the student body of Degrassi Junior High. The idea was that no one actor in the company was more important than another, and those who may have only played smaller roles initially were given the chance at bigger storylines. The Repco had a lot of influence over the direction of the show. According to the showrunners, they took the kids' criticisms or ideas on board, things as small as saying, "This slang isn't realistic," to providing the ideas for entire episodes through their real-life experiences. For example, the actress of Spike shared the story of being discriminated against because of her hair. Yeah, that. And that storyline was woven into the plot of an episode in season 3. The only other teen drama I know of that's known for doing this is Skins. So Degrassi's in pretty good company there. Another similar choice that they made was the decision not to have a makeup or wardrobe department, at least not a traditional one. Instead, for the most part, kids did their own hair, makeup, and costuming. I actually didn't know this, and while rewatching the show recently for the video, I was surprised at how much I loved the clothing choices for the characters. They all felt incredibly believable, from kids with actual style to those who were maybe trying a bit too hard. It all struck me as very junior high. Certain clothing items would also make reappearances, a practice not unheard of in wardrobe departments, but something that still added to the grounded feeling of Degrassi being a real place with real characters. There was only one actress I read about who didn't actually dress like her character, and that was Steph. Steph was meant to dress sort of mature and provocatively, and it makes sense that the young actress maybe didn't dress like that, considering her character. And honestly, with that, I think it's time to jump into the show. Part 3. Come on, give us a try at Degrassi Junior High. What the heck? Degrassi Junior High lasted for 3 seasons, with the first 2 seasons making up 2 semesters of the same school year, and the 3rd season covering a whole year. The Degrassi series as a whole would switch between these formats over its lifespan, with later series switching between seasons taking place over whole years or single semesters as storylines required. Originally, the Junior High in Degrassi Junior High refers to 7th and 8th grades, and the show showcases a wide variety of characters in both grades. In the 3rd season, in order to keep the older characters in the show, they contrive a reason for the 9th graders to stick around a bit. Because so many characters and storylines are introduced, I cannot possibly talk about all of them. I'm just going to run through this thing in a sort of bullet list format. I'll try and touch on characters or storylines that are the most interesting to me, but this is absolutely not a comprehensive rundown of the show, despite it being called a retrospective. So if you want to see the whole story, go find the show on YouTube. Also, this is your last chance to avoid spoilers for basically the entire franchise. So if you're interested in staying fresh on this 40-year-old television show, then bail out now. So since I mentioned her before, let's start with Stephanie K. So each season of Degrassi Junior High more or less begins and ends with a particular character's story, or arc, for lack of a better term. See, unlike modern teen dramas, there's not really much of an overarching story that's happening throughout the season, but there is still a surprising amount of continuity. There are huge character developments when compared to something like Boy Meets World, for example, which I was rewatching at the same time I was watching this, and which aired a decade and a half later. Because of the series' mandate for problems not to be solved by adults, often kids' storylines just weren't resolved and would come up again, an obstacle in their own or another kid's story. The series liked to bookend the seasons with these. So in seasons 2 and 3, it was Spike and Wheels, and in season 1, it was Stephanie K. This makes sense as a starting place for the show because looked at in totality, Steph's story is about being in junior high in the realist way, about feeling grown up, but lacking the maturity and life experience to handle grown-up situations. Listening to me say that, it may sound like I'm dunking on Steph, but I promise I'm not. I'm actually dunking on all middle schoolers because we all do this. At some point, we all decide we're grown up now and let that new worldview of ourselves and our lives dictate some new behavior. Whether that's experimenting with drugs and alcohol, rebelling against authority, dating, etc. For Steph, being grown up basically means that she's acting the way that she's seen women act in magazines and movies. She has a new style now, she says in the first episode, and that new style seems primarily catered toward the male gaze. Look, this isn't a problem. I'm not slut-shaming a 13-year-old over here, but it gives an insight into what Steph thinks is important, what she thinks is grown up. Steph has a terminal problem with needing to be cool and popular and liked, specifically with the male demographic of Degrassi Junior High. This character trait of hers will follow her around for the remainder of her time in the series, but it first appears in episode 1. The pattern is this. Steph makes a decision that she perceives as being mature and grown up, and then fails, lacking the life skills or determination to execute. For example, in episode 1, running for student body president. Her motives here are more or less pure. When the principal calls for students to run for president, he implies that it will only be boys running.
School elections are coming up next week. Get those nominations in early. Get involved, guys. Here's your chance to serve your school.
What about girls?
In reaction to both this and her friend bigging her up, she decides to run. Part 1, the mature decision. Steph's friend Vula then writes a speech for her, and Steph brings on Joey Jeremiah. We'll be talking more about him later, but for now, you just need to know that he's your typical class clown type. Joey, being a teenage boy, emphasizes that the most valuable thing about Steph is her appearance, and she leans into that. In an attempt to get votes from the male student body, she promises a kiss to anyone who says they'll vote for her. The thing I find the most interesting about this episode is that the supposed, promiscuity of this action is not the thing that Steph is actually criticized for. Her strategy works. There's a funny moment that I really like where Vula says the girls at the school aren't happy that Steph is giving kisses to the boys and they aren't going to vote for her. And Steph says, that's fine. As long as the girls split their votes among the remaining boys running, she'll still have a plurality of the votes and win. And she's right. There's basically no downsides to her strategy. She doesn't get mono or disrespected or called a slut or anything like that as comeuppance, which is actually kind of a huge surprise since, it was made in the 80s. The lesson at the end of the episode was actually about the fact that she did not thank her friend who put in the work to help her write her speech to the student body. Instead, she gave this big thanks to Joey Jeremiah, who basically didn't do anything and just gets rewarded for doing nothing. Vula gets mad, rightfully so, and Steph issues basically the worst apology of all time.
Oh, that. Sorry, but, no, I don't.
And that's it. That's the end of the episode. Remember what I said about storylines not resolving? Steph's poor presidential decision-making will continue, as well as her rift with her former best friend. In an attempt to look grown-up and cool, Steph will get drunk before a school dance, a classic Degrassi move, imply that she's willing to go all the way with a boy on the first date, a rumor that then gets picked up by the whole class and spread to the guy she's going out with, and lie to an adult man about her age in order to make him like her, date him. Oh, look at that. It's time for a fun new segment I like to call Adults at Degrassi Can't Be Trusted Corner. Adults are primarily absent from Degrassi Junior High. This got brought up in newspaper articles I read about the show from the time when it aired. This is normal in teen dramas now. I think of shows like Gossip Girl or Teen Wolf or whatever, where adult characters are relegated to background roles if they appear at all, if only for the convenience of not having to explain to adults why their teen kids are running around in the woods at night, turning into werewolves. But the idea that these kids would be running around with minimal supervision and that adults would not be solving their problems was pretty groundbreaking at the time. This means that for the most part, adults only play a role in the show when they're there to serve as obstacles, which gives the whole thing a kind of a series of unfortunate events adults cannot be trusted vibe. The most benign of these are parents just not getting it.
Parents just don't understand.
Or getting divorced, or just making bad decisions, or just not caring very much about what's going on with their kids. But I would say that those types of adults are in the minority when compared to those who do active harm to the kids on the show. Just to name a few, we have adults who are physically abusive, emotionally distant, negligent due to disinterest, negligent due to substance abuse, and teachers who bully their students. That's right, I'm calling you out, Mr. Radich. And of course, it wouldn't be the 80s if we didn't have a subsection of adults who can't be trusted that I like to call creepy old men who are creepy at our main characters. There are at least 3 of these in the 3 seasons of Degrassi Junior High, which seems really high to me. I couldn't think of another show that decided to throw in predatory adults this often. But the 80s, as you know if you watch my Babysitter's Club video, which you didn't, because no one did, because YouTube put it in purgatory. The 80s had a sort of obsession with child abuse, and particularly the idea of stranger danger. Unfortunately, all 3 of these depictions of creepy old men who are creepy at our main characters are stranger danger cases, or at least close enough. 2 are men who are in positions of power over their victims, but none of them are super well known by the children of their family, which comprises the majority of real life cases. One of these creepy old men who are creepy at our main characters is Damon King, a soap opera star that Stephanie and her friends are obsessed with. They visit him at a book signing where Steph tells him she's 16 for some reason, and gets his number and a kiss on the cheek. She decides to pursue this. Again, Steph thinks she's grown up, but she keeps making these immature decisions and ends up on a date with this adult man. During the date, while in his car, he pulls over and tries to make a move on her. She jumps out of the car, and when she tells him she's only 14, not 16, he speeds away. I live in the US, so at first I was baffled. A podiatrist who draws the line at 14? That's kind of weird and arbitrary. Then I had a thought, and sure enough, the age of consent in Canada is 16. So luckily, Steph ended up with one of those law-abiding podiatrists who want to spend time in cars with teenage girls, but only the legal ones. So, what happens next? What happens? Does the guy get arrested? Does she reveal to the world that this soap opera star is a total creep? No, of course not. It's totally unresolved. Steph is kind of humiliated by the whole thing and doesn't want to talk about it. The end. Real quick, while we're in this creepy old men who are creepy at our main character corner, I want to talk about Lucy and the substitute teacher. This is Lucy. We love her. She's great. She's really smart. She's super driven. Both of her parents are high-powered, doctors or something. They're very well off, but they're not around a lot. So she's sort of neglected. This is a recurring theme for Lucy. A new sub shows up and all the girls think he's really cute. I don't see it, but I think the bar for cute teachers was in the toilet in the 80s. He takes a special interest in Lucy. He thinks she's really talented and super mature for her age. We all know that she's super mature for her age. We all know that this is a red flag by now, right? Anyway, he asks her to stay after school because he wants her help looking over the teacher's lesson plans because he can't figure that out on his own. Except, of course, instead of getting her help, he just does this. Luckily, our boy Wheels, who we haven't talked about yet, but here he is. This is Wheels. He sees the whole thing. He makes a point of entering the room to interrupt and then follows her out into the hallway to tell her he'll back her up if she wants to tell anyone. Which is phenomenal. Stan Wheels. But again, this is where the episode ends. It sort of seems like Lucy might tell someone about what happened, but once those credits roll, we just have no way of knowing. Except for this time, because we have a sequel episode. So sometime in the next season, we learn that Lucy didn't tell anybody. For the most part, the show is pretty non-judgmental about her choice, which I really liked. It's uncommon for media nowadays to allow women the space not to call out their accusers, which can be a very dangerous thing for them, especially a young girl accusing someone in a position of authority over her. Even with someone like Wheels who witnessed it, I can understand Lucy's hesitation and why she wouldn't immediately report it. However, once the creep makes his way back to Degrassi and appears to be doing it to another student, Lucy decides to step up and do the right thing. She tries to convince the new girl to come forward too, and it takes a little bit of pressure. It's interesting because instead of having the other characters try to convince Lucy to come forward, the show has Lucy be the one to convince a new victim after witnessing the harm he inflicted on her. This clarifies for Lucy that it's not going to stop until they put a stop to it. I think this was actually a really clever way of handling the situation. In the end, it's essentially two young girls being given agency, instead of other characters and adults moralizing at teen girls who have been the victims of a really vulnerable, terrible thing. At the end of the episode, Lucy and her backup crew show up at the principal's office to tell him what happened, and that's where the storyline ends. Again, if you want tidy resolutions, Degrassi Junior High is not the show for you. Okay, but back to Steph. Her storyline at the end of season 1 looks like it's going to wrap up nicely. At this point, she's alienated a huge portion of her friends, making choices that primarily prioritize boys over her friends and things like that. One of which is this guy she likes, Wheels. In an attempt to make Wheels jealous, she decides to promote Joey Jeremiah to a vacant position on the student council. The problem is that the position is reserved for grade 7s, and Joey Jeremiah is grade 8. By the end of the episode, the entire school has rebelled against her. Wheels and Joey both found out about her little game and are pissed, obviously, and have turned on her. And all of grade 7 is chanting her name in the halls, calling for her impeachment. Frustrated, Steph decides that she just wants things to go back to the way they used to be, before she reinvented herself. She decides to throw out all of her new clothes and take her position as president seriously. Nice, right? Tidy. Except that she doesn't. She ends season 1 like this, but her transformation ends up lasting all of about 2 episodes into season 2 when she gets jealous that a girl wearing her old clothes is getting the attention of a boy she likes, and she reverts back. Oh well, she tried. And listen, that's not even the worst. I think the most egregious example of the show just flat out refusing to resolve plot lines is Kathleen. So first, a primer. This is Christine. Don't worry too much about her. We call her Spike. You could probably guess why. She's Spike. This is Caitlin. Caitlin is great. Caitlin is iconic. She's a huge character on the show, and she will continue to be a part of the series for decades to come, including being a part of one of the show's more popular ships. This is Kathleen. Don't get them confused. Caitlin is iconic. Kathleen is a major bitch. She might also be my favorite character. The first few times she shows up, I think Kathleen is just meant to be a judgmental antagonist. She shows up in an early episode to say, lesbianism is bad. Don't worry, we're going to circle back to this. I don't think Kathleen is necessarily against lesbians in particular. She just thinks that anything outside of the norm is bad. Things that Kathleen doesn't like include teen pregnancy, teen drinking, epilepsy. However, remember that Degrassi Junior High assigned roles and storylines based on the actor's abilities, and the actress who played Kathleen was pretty great in my opinion. The showrunners must have agreed with me because not only did they give her more storylines, but the ones she got were buck wild and just basically never get resolved. A lot of Degrassi characters follow in Kathleen's footsteps. She was the first to deal with a lot of classic issues that would pop up later in the series. Let's go through the list. Alcoholism. The first big reveal about Kathleen is her home life. Essentially, it's shown that the reason Kathleen is so hyper-responsible is because she's forced to take care of herself. Her dad is gone most of the time, and her mom drinks a lot, leaving Kathleen to take care of herself, starting at least as far back as 7th grade. It's never really made clear how long it's been going on. In the episode that reveals all of this, Kathleen does confront her mom by calling her a drunk, but then nothing happens, obviously. It just remains open-ended. Eating disorder. In the next season, we get to check in and see how Kathleen is doing. Spoilers, it's bad. Life at her house has not improved, and she's moved on to coping through disordered eating. I don't want to talk too much about this because I don't want to trigger anyone, but just know she hits all of the bullet points for anorexia with binge purge subtype. Her friend Melanie diagnoses her through the never fail combination of seeing a science fair exhibit about eating disorders and reading Kathleen's diary. Cool. Melanie is then shocked when it turns out that telling Kathleen she has an eating disorder doesn't magically cure her.
But you have got a problem.
I do not.
Yes, you do. You need help.
I don't need help, and I don't have a problem.
And the episode ends, surprise, surprise, on a cliffhanger, fully unresolved. Melanie will bring up Kathleen's eating disorder in later episodes of the series, mentioning it to other characters like, oh, I hope she's gotten help. And then the show just drops it like, oh well. Bonus, abusive boyfriend. This is spoilers for Degrassi High, so think of this as a preview for that video. But Kathleen will also be the first Degrassi character to be in an abusive relationship with a peer, so look forward to that. The open-endedness of Kathleen's stories lend a sort of sympathy to her behavior through the series. She sits in the background of episodes, rolling her eyes and harshly criticizing anything she sees as less than perfect. But as the viewers get a peek into her life, we begin to understand a little bit about her thought process. Her issues don't excuse her bigotry. She's often homophobic, for example, but I still find it very interesting that because of the way the show is structured, we know that she's having these struggles the entire time. It introduces nuance and complication in a way that later seasons of Degrassi and other teen dramas have shied away from, attempting to solve each issue as they popped up instead of letting them linger more organically. Real quick, I want to talk about two storylines that actually do get resolved somewhat within Degrassi Junior High, and then we can move on to the lightning round. As I mentioned before, these are characters that the seasons sort of bookend with. While Degrassi Junior High doesn't have an overarching story, there are a few story threads of particular characters that stand out, especially when looking back in the year 2021. Fans of the series from way back will cite these storylines as well as Caitlin and Joey as being the most memorable. Real quick, I just don't have time to talk about Caitlin and Joey, but this is Caitlin and Joey. They're like the ship. Hopefully if I ever make a Degrassi High video, I can talk more about them, but just know they're adorable. So let's talk about the characters of Wheels and Spike. All of the best characters in this show have wild nicknames, by the way. Wheels, Snake, Spike, LD, BLT, and Joey Jeremiah, which isn't a nickname exactly, but since I can't say his name without saying the full thing, Joey Jeremiah, I count it. Derek Wheeler, also known as Wheels, basically stays out of the way for most of season 1. He serves as a sort of backdrop to Joey and his shenanigans. He plays the bass in the Zit Remedy, which I haven't talked about yet, but okay, actually wait, let's talk about it now. Now is a great time. The Zit Remedy is the best part of Degrassi Junior High, and if you disagree with me, you're wrong. No, wait, come back. The Zit Remedy is a band made up of Joey Jeremiah, Snake, and Wheels, playing keyboard, guitar, and bass, respectively. They have one song. Okay, wait, actually, that's not true. According to the Wikipedia, a second song is mentioned in one of the novels, but since I can't find those, I can't tell you anything about it. But I can tell you about their main single, Everybody Wants Something, parentheses, They'll Never Give Up. Close parentheses. I'm only guessing at that name, but I'm fairly confident. That's basically the only lyric in the song. I'm only mostly kidding.
Everybody wants something, they'll never give up.
I love the Zit Remedy because I think it perfectly encapsulates what it's like to have a band in middle school, where you and your friends basically can play 3 chords and want to write your own original music, but have no way of knowing how to do it. So you write one song that has about 4 bars and then just play it to death for the rest of time. And that's essentially what the Zit Remedy does. For the first season of Degrassi Junior High, they spend most of their time during rehearsal arguing about what their band name should be. Even after they get their name, they spend a disproportionate amount of time on branding, making t-shirts, demo tapes, working at getting gigs, all before writing more songs, or, God forbid, practicing the one song they do have. And isn't that just a perfect example of how 14-year-old boys do things? Anyway, back to Wheels. His main storyline in season 1 is about his biological father. It turns out Wheels is adopted. This storyline intersects really nicely with Spike's, who just found out that she's pregnant and is considering adoption. Wheels confronts his dad, who pops up back into his life, about why he gave him up. In the end, he seems to understand his dad's motivation and tells Spike that he doesn't resent his dad's role in his adoption. In season 2, he struggles with school. It's not a particularly interesting storyline, but it's fun to watch it go throughout the season. He starts off in kind of a bad place, and his parents continue to push him to study harder and harder, eventually pulling him out of the Zit Remedy and saying that he can't practice in the band until he gets his grades up. He goes to tutors and spends his time working on projects. Basically, Wheels in this season is a nose to the grindstone kind of guy, but he works his butt off and ends up passing at the end of the school year, which is something that Joey Jeremiah, who is in a very similar situation, cannot say. This kind of storyline is what I mean when I talk about the more mundane storylines of Degrassi being just as fun or interesting to me as the big bombastic ones. I think a lot more kids can relate to the idea of struggling in school and having to give up things they love temporarily in order to pull their grades up. Because he's such a likable, believable character, I hope it helps kids feel not so alone or stupid for having to put in the extra effort. However, one thing you cannot call the Wheels story in season 3 is mundane. Basically, his whole life blows up. Wheels is feeling a little bit rebellious. He's pushing back against his parents, who have decided Joey Jeremiah is a bad influence. They decide this after Joey convinces his friends to literally steal a car when none of them have licenses, so, fair, and forbid Wheels from seeing him. He ignores this, and one night, instead of joining his parents at the movie theater, sneaks out to record a demo tape of Everybody Wants Something over at Joey's house. When he gets back home, he finds a police car sitting out front holding his grandmother, who tells him his parents were hit by a drunk driver on the way to the theater and were killed. This starts Wheels' season-long storyline of grieving. Many characters are affected by this, something that I appreciated. The show depicts how everybody deals with the monumental tragedy of this boy losing both of his parents at the same time. Joey Jeremiah shows real maturity and compassion, while their other friend, Snake, pulls away, afraid, freaked out, and unable to show how he cares. Wheels becomes convinced that nobody wants to be around him because he just reminds them of this horrible tragedy. He basically drops out of school, unable to find any motivation to go. His grandmother takes him in, but she proves to be unable to deal with his rebellious behavior. He's gone for like half the season. Eventually, his grandmother tells him that if he doesn't start going to school again, the government's going to put him in a group home. He sees this as her threatening him and decides to run away from home. He seeks out his birth father, who sent him a postcard for his birthday. He gets picked up by a hitchhiker along the way. Actually, he gets picked up by a number of hitchhikers, all of whom seem to be pretty nice. Except for the last one. Yeah, that's right, we're back in creepy adult corner. Earlier in the video, I said there were 3 predators, but I only talked about 2. You thought I forgot, didn't you? Well, I didn't. I was just saving it for the most dramatic reveal possible. This time in creepy old adults who want to be creepy at our main characters, Degrassi Junior High wants kids to know that boys can be victims too. After getting picked up by a sus older man, I sound so old, I should not, I'm just gonna say suspicious. After getting picked up by a suspicious older man, Wheels gets pulled over into a weird rural part of Canada. The dude tries to make moves on him and Wheels bails out of the car. Luckily, the guy doesn't grab him or murder him and stuff him in the trunk of his car. He just drives off, leaving Wheels stranded in the middle of nowhere in a place he's never been. Which sucks, but it's not as bad as being murdered, which, you know, we were all told growing up in the 90s is what would happen if we ever went hitchhiking. Eventually, Wheels does find his way to his dad, but it's not exactly the way he imagined. His dad's new girlfriend is pregnant, and they really have no interest in raising a teenage boy. His grandma manages to track him down and convinces him to come home. When Wheels realizes that the lifeboat that he's daydreamed about to get out of his life isn't going to work, he sort of realizes there's no magic way out of the grief that he's living through right now. He just has to keep living his life and keep moving forward. That episode ends with Wheels returning to school and Joey Jeremiah sort of excitedly asking if he's back for good this time. Like I said, this is one of the few storylines that ends with what I would call at least something of a resolution. He'll spend the rest of season 3 trying to make up his grades and really struggling with school. He works hard and eventually gets the bare minimum needed to pass. His teachers realize that he's been through it this year, and it's implied that they passed him just because none of them wanted to be the teacher that failed a kid who lost his whole family just a few months earlier. Wheels would go on to have a complicated story in high school, but where they leave it at the end of junior high is super satisfying in my opinion. Okay, so I'm joking when I call her that, but I'm only like half joking. Christine, also called Spike, makes a relatively minor impact in her seasons of Degrassi Junior High and Degrassi High. However, her pregnancy would eventually prove to be the most important thing to happen in the franchise run, for without Spike, we could not have Emma, and without Emma, we would not have Degrassi The Next Generation, possibly the best teen drama to ever exist. So if you love the later seasons of the show, you have Spike and her teen pregnancy to thank for it. Degrassi goes hard with Spike. First of all, she's a teen mom at age 14. I can't think of another show that does that. Like most teen dramas, abortion is addressed but not really considered very seriously. Spike is deciding between adoption or keeping her baby, a decision which gets made mostly off screen and explicitly after a lot of group meetings and counseling. Throughout season 2, Spike goes through the horror of being kicked out of school for being pregnant. The school makes a big show about it being for her benefit, but it's clear that the parents are worried that having a pregnant girl around will somehow set a bad example. She takes classes remotely in the days before Zoom and only returns after giving birth. Outside of this, Spike's storyline in junior high mostly focuses on her relationship with Shane, her ex-boyfriend and the father of her baby. Shane is the son of a pastor and basically does everything wrong from the beginning. And I can't say I blame him. He's 14 and about to become a father. I have a lot of sympathy for Shane. But the show kind of portrays him as this clueless incompetent for the majority of it. You know, like a teenage boy. I'm sorry, I'm dunking on teenage boys a lot in this for no reason. Y'all are great. For example, when Spike is trying to figure out if she wants to keep the baby, her pregnancy support group recommends she carry around an egg for 2 weeks to get a feel for having an infant. You know, that old chestnut. She takes this task very seriously. The silliest thing she does is allow someone to draw a face on it and name him Egbert, of course. Toward the end of the experiment, Shane insists that he wants to be a part of her and the baby's lives. She tells him to take the egg so that she can go to a party that weekend, proving himself responsible. Shane is not thrilled about this. Not least because he wanted to go to the party. He decides to split the difference, deciding to go and bringing the baby with him. Sorry, the egg. The egg baby. This is bad enough, but Shane, being a teenage boy, again, why did I write so much mean? I'm sorry. But Shane, being a teenager, soon engages in a bit of roughhousing at this party, and poor fragile Egbert ends up being thrown around the room. Spike walks in the middle of all this and sees how irresponsible Shane is being and storms out, taking this as a sign that he's just not ready to take this seriously. This kind of thing just keeps recurring with Shane. He says he wants to be a part of the baby's life, and then he fails to make decisions that will benefit the baby. For example, after Emma is born, he starts paying a sort of unofficial child support, giving Spike what he can afford to help her pay for daycare and other essentials. However, more than once, Shane uses the money on himself, sometimes going so far as to lie to Spike and tell her that he's broke, when really he just wants to use the money on a concert or whatever. Again, he's a teenager. Understandable. I actually really like storylines like this. They're grounded. They're real. But it's also really hard for me not to cringe every time he screws up, because he keeps making the same mistakes over and over. Spike is on the other end of the spectrum. All of her money goes towards paying for a nanny to take care of her kid when her mom can't. She often can't afford to go to concerts that other kids are going to or attend parties. A number of kids come to her when they think they're ready to have sex and ask her about her decision to do it, particularly the girls who worry that they're going to end up like her. Toward the end of season 3, though, Spike is basically fed up. She's about to reach a year in high school when she can make the choice to drop out. And after receiving very poor marks in school, a consequence of being a freaking teen mom, she decides that's exactly what she's going to do. She's going to drop out, go to a trade school, and take care of her daughter that way. However, at the pressure of her mom and a teacher who does some very unhealthy projection on her,
You count your blessings, young lady. At least you can have a baby.
Spike decides to continue with school. So what about Shane? In season 3, with all that unpaid child support money burning a hole in his pocket, Shane buys concert tickets and some acid with the plan for him and a friend to drop it at the concert. We see them take it, walk into the concert, and then nothing. What happens next is not very clear. The characters continually make references to acid making you feel like you can fly.
It gets to it, you peak, and you're flying, man. You'll love it.
But we also know that Shane is really struggling with his newfound fatherhood and his parents' lack of acceptance of the situation. Remember, his dad is a pastor, so this is a very conservative situation Shane finds himself in. We don't see what happens, but we do know that after the concert, Shane doesn't come home. Eventually, the guy who gave him the acid talks to the cops, and the full story comes out. After the concert, the boys split up. Some unspecified period of time later, Shane is found under a bridge. The show never explicitly states what happened. I think The Next Generation insinuates, and a number of contemporaneous articles assert, that he probably jumped voluntarily, attempting to, maybe, Kermit unalive, as the kids say. But because of the mention of acid feeling like flying, I think the show's trying to leave it ambiguous. Do y'all remember that, by the way? That myth that if you ever took acid, you'd think that you could fly and you'd jump off a building or something? Stories go back as far as the 1950s of people jumping out of windows while on LSD, and they're basically all urban legends. Even those that are rooted on truth were exaggerated for programs like Dare in order to scare us all away from drugs. There is no evidence that acid makes people think they can fly. Dare really did a number on us. Anyway, Shane lives, but he has severe brain damage from the fall. The audience is told he's going to a school for disabled teenagers, and then he's written out. I feel like this is a huge disservice to the character as well as the disabled community. Without meaning to, it implies that people who've become disabled are sidelined away from everyone else. The Next Generation somewhat acknowledges this in their Shane retcon 2-parter, but that's for another video. This one's long enough as it is. Part 4, Lightning Round. Okay, we are so far in this video and we've barely even scratched the surface. I haven't even mentioned Arthur or Heather or Erica. There are plot lines and characters we haven't even touched. So we're gonna do a lightning round. I'm gonna name an issue of the day or character, talk about them briefly, and rate how I think Degrassi handled it. Yick and Arthur. Yick and Arthur are introduced as 7th graders who are super nerdy, and that's basically their whole thing. Arthur strikes me as being a little bit neurodivergent, maybe because I relate to him so much, I don't know. Either way, I love these kids. Yick gets some pretty cool storylines, but Arthur basically never gets the storylines he deserves. Bullying. Yick and Arthur are bullied in the stereotypical 80s fashion. I think they're literally shoved into a locker. Like, that's what I'm talking about. I don't even know how realistic this is, but it's boring to watch. 2 out of 10. Bully teacher. This is a cousin of bullying. Mr. Radich, kind of the main teacher of the show, keeps calling Yick Mr. Yick the Unorganized, which is such a scummy thing to do. The boys push back by submitting an old paper under Yick's name to see if it gets a different grade, proving that Radich is prejudiced against Yick. I keep thinking this episode is going to veer into racism territory, but it never really goes there. I like the kids pushing back against the unfair authority, though. 6 out of 10. Strict parents. Vula's immigrant dad doesn't want her going to school dances. I don't know. I feel like later seasons of Degrassi do this storyline better. Also, why is it always immigrant parents? 3 out of 10. Teen drinking. This one is actually in the same episode as Strict Parents, proving Vula's dad 100% correct about school dances. Sorry, Vula's dad, you were right. School dances are a corrupting influence. Lucy's parents have an unguarded liquor stash. Like I said earlier, Lucy is the stereotypical unwatched latchkey kid. So Steph, Heather, and Erica all partake before the dance, only to inevitably get sick later. I mentioned earlier that getting drunk before school dances and then getting sick at the dance is a Degrassi tradition. I love it. 10 out of 10. Heather and Erica are twins, and their whole thing is that they're kind of, opposites. Erica wants to be grown up and date boys, and Heather is a little bit more restrained and responsible. Inexplicably, I love them so much. Abusive parents. This one's really over the top, y'all. This happens to a kid named Rick. No, different Rick, who basically is only introduced to be the abused bad boy for Caitlin to fall in love with. This guy walked so Sean could run. The abuse itself feels really unrealistic and hardcore, and this episode breaks the cardinal rule of Degrassi Junior High: adults don't solve problems. While I appreciate the lesson that you should tell an adult if someone you know is being abused, I'm sure there were about 12 more after-school specials saying that exact same thing. And that's not even what happens in this episode. Instead, a secretary at the school thinks Joey is being abused because he asks some very unsubtle, hypothetical questions. Luckily, the social worker who swoops in happens to see Rick at Joey's house and puts it all together, but honestly, it's just a big mess. 4 out of 10. Joey Jeremiah. What can I say? The leader of the Zit Remedy. That hat. Those shirts. He's the king. We all want to be him. Joey Jeremiah is the best. 10 out of 10. I'm not ranking characters, but Joey is 10 out of 10. And while we're here, that's Snake. Snake is great. As we're about to hear, he's not sexist. He's really tall. That's not a good thing. Snake is kind of nerdy. I don't know how he fell in with the rest of the Zit Remedy. At one point, he reveals that he's learning classical guitar, and he has to cut back on Zit Remedy rehearsals because he's learning how to play guitar actually really well, and I love that about him. Snake is also a 10 out of 10. Oh, and his real name is Archie. Sexism. Boilerplate 80s sexism episode. The boys think the girls can't do sports good, so the girls' swim team challenges the boys' soccer team to a swim meet. It goes without saying that the girls win. The most interesting part of this episode is Melanie, who is at first excited to buy her first bra and then humiliated when the boys tease her about it. Too real. Snake proves he's a real one by not taking the boys' side in the sexism race. 3 out of 10. Melanie's main character trait is that she's friends with Kathleen and wants a boyfriend. Particularly, she wants to date Snake. Lesbianism. Listen, I don't know what to make of this one. Caitlin suspects her teacher might be a lesbian and keeps having somewhat romantic-ish dreams about her. She begins to worry that this might make her a lesbian. In the end, Caitlin confronts Miss Avery about the rumors. Miss Avery gives her the most ambiguous answer about whether or not she's gay.
And I'm sorry, I thought you were gay.
There's nothing to be sorry for. Besides, would it make any difference if I were? Would you think less of me, Caitlin?
And then asks Caitlin to confront her own bigotry. This is probably the weirdest episode of the show to me. If it wasn't made in the 80s, I'd take it as evidence of Caitlin being at least a little bit bisexual, but it's hard to know what to think. It's super weird, but I kind of love it. 7 out of 10. While we're talking about it, Caitlin is one of the 2 characters in this show who's sort of like an SJW type. She's the less extreme of the 2, so we know that she's supposed to be the reasonable one. She has probably my favorite haircut in the entire show. Disability. Caitlin is diagnosed with epilepsy. At first, she denies it will affect her life, and then, after struggling to take her medication at school and having a seizure in front of her friends and losing a part in the school play, she swings hard in the other direction, deciding her life is now completely over. In the end, she lands somewhere kind of in the middle. I don't know, it's kind of interesting, and it's loads better than Stacey McGill's diabetes. 7 out of 10. Mono. This is not really an issue in the same sense nowadays, but I feel like mono was like a thing in the 80s. I think maybe STI fears were at an all-time high, so this disease that you get from kissing was seen as this huge threat to teenagers, and maybe served as a kind of proxy for more serious STIs. Like, they didn't actually want to talk about herpes, but they wanted to put a stand-in for herpes, so they used mono. Either way, this has been covered in a lot of 80s media that I enjoy, including The Babysitter's Club. This episode doubles as a twin-ass episode for Erica and Heather. They only have one episode in which they really switch places, and this isn't it. But in this one, they both are kind of seeing a guy who is clearly only interested in their appearance. He doesn't care which one he's seeing, he just likes the way they look. They both kiss him, and the whole thing is mad skeezy. Anyway, it ends up not even being mono, so 1 out of 10, I guess. Animal testing. Is this an issue? I don't know. Degrassi The Next Generation did GMOs, so if that counts, I'm counting this. Caitlin butts heads with Liz, who is the other SJW of the series. She's the more insufferable one. At first, Caitlin is on board for the protest of animal testing, but as she does research, she finds out it's not as black and white as she's been led to believe. At the end of the episode, she reveals that her epilepsy medication was tested on animals. The episode ends with Liz taking a hardline stance against any animal testing and Caitlin being conflicted. I kind of love this one. The show really went for nuance. 8 out of 10. Depression. Steph is depressed. There's no stated reason for it. She's just clearly shown as listless, unmotivated, and struggles to find joy in things. In the end, she does find some motivation and meaning in helping her brother Arthur deal with their mom's remarriage. The show never outright says she's depressed, but that's clearly what they depict. She also threatens to unalive herself a couple of times, and the characters around her mention that that's a warning sign, but that's about as serious as it gets. It's actually pretty dark now that I think about it. 9 out of 10. Homosexuality. I'm separating this from lesbianism because the show separates them, so. Snake learns his brother is gay. There is a lot of just rampant casual 80s homophobia in this one, and a lot of the characters we're supposed to like just take part. When Snake's brother comes out to him, Snake's reaction is basically, "You're one of those?"
What are you living with one of those for?
But Snake does kind of come around by the end when his brother is disowned by their parents. A lot of the story is wrapped up in the connection between HIV/AIDS and homosexuality, which was prevalent at the time. It's super dated but well-meaning. I would give it a better score, but as far as I'm aware, Snake's brother never shows up again. So 5 out of 10, I guess. Racism. This is the episode of Degrassi that says the N-word a lot. This is where I mentioned that the majority of the cast of Degrassi is white, and BLT, the first major black male character on the show, doesn't really show up until season 3. Maybe they felt like they had to do some catch up with him, so they kind of squished 2 stories into one in this one. BLT gets in trouble for fighting someone who calls him the N-word randomly in the hallway. Later, his girlfriend finds out that her parents disapprove of her dating a person of color. She's sort of a goody two-shoes, but she decides to rebel against her parents for the first time, continuing to see BLT in spite of their racism. As with most depictions of racism in the 80s, it's pretty black and white, pardon the pun. I can't speak to how well it represented the bigotry of the period, but I also kind of like that they went for it at all. While it happened really late in junior high, Degrassi High would continue some of BLT's stories and the struggles that he and his girlfriend have to face being a biracial couple. So I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. Honorable mentions, great episodes that I don't have a lot to say about but are worth giving a shout out. Lucy shoplifting. Arthur's mom wins the lottery. Yick lies about his background because he thinks that being a refugee is embarrassing. Heather and Erica switch places during a date with a boy so that Erica can go on a date with the guy while still also going to her dentist appointment. And Arthur says this amazing thing about his cousin.
She keeps on staring at me. She's weird. She used to have a pet rat. Ew.
Other things that would become staples in Degrassi as a whole were introduced in this series as well, including license-free joyrides, changing clothes at school to hide your outfit from your parents, lying about being related to a sibling, wet dreams, characters with double lives as musicians and actors, and characters thinking they're taking drugs that's really just aspirin. Okay, that one's only happened twice.
Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
Part 5. Legacy. Degrassi Junior High ended with the school burning down. Yeah, they really went for it. Actually, I want to talk about this ending for a sec. Bear with me because one thing I haven't mentioned about Degrassi Junior High is the theme song. 80s television is known for having some buck wild theme songs, but I think Degrassi Junior High is a very special kind of weird.
Wake up in the morning feeling shiny and needy. I gotta go to school. Wait, everybody can succeed. All you need is to believe at Degrassi Junior High.
I'm inclined to say it was super cheesy even for the time. However, something about the tone they're trying to strike, hyper inspirational and catchy, must have resonated because this definitely set the stage for the rest of the Degrassi theme songs. Starting here, they're basically all about kids persevering in the face of going to school during your adolescence, basically. Everybody can succeed, all you need is to believe. Paved the way for whatever it takes, I know I can make it through. And I love it for that. The reason I'm bringing it up now, of all times, is to talk about the ending theme. Or rather, the lack of one. See, in all of the episodes of Degrassi Junior High, and all of the bonkers cliffhanger endings I mentioned before, all of the unresolved plot threads about abusive substitute teachers and dying parents and the school burning down, they all have the same formula. Freeze frame, roll credits, and then that piano version of that theme song. That absolutely unhinged, upbeat piece of music that sounds like it was written by a Brady Bunch character on speed, bounces in, ready to whisk you away. Let me give you some examples.
And I don't have a problem.
We'd like to see Mr. Lawrence, please.
It would have to be very important.
It is.
No.
They're dead.
No. No.
I have not edited a single one of these. This is how they aired. When my wife and I first watched these episodes years ago, back when the series was on Amazon Prime, the theme song became kind of a joke with us. As time went on, I thought that we had exaggerated the wild juxtaposition of the tones of the episode with the music being played. But rewatching it, no, we didn't. They all end like this. So Degrassi Junior High burns down during a school dance snatch. The credits roll, the theme song bounces in.
It's in our classroom.
Don't worry.
The smoke is so heavy. So much smoke. Where are we going to school? Oh my god. I'm gonna miss this school.
That's the end of the series. Buffy could never. Degrassi Junior High was ended with an eye for a sequel. They knew that closing up Junior High, they were going to be making a sequel series. I mentioned before that season 3 kept some of the high schoolers around, forcing 9th graders to attend a middle school in order to keep them on the show. Degrassi Junior High ended with characters who were grade 7 in the first season, graduating from 8th grade and moving on to high school. There were a few characters who had been introduced in season 3 as grade 7s, but we never got to spend a lot of time with them, and for some reason, a few of them carry over to the high school anyway. So that's what happened next. Degrassi High. At the time, reviews of Degrassi Junior High were very positive. The show broke new ground in some major ways. Reviewers were impressed by the tone of the show, which was mature enough for adults to enjoy, while also still being accessible to its intended young audience. Also of interest was the fresh perspective of the show, focusing only on the kids' lives, rather than sprinkling in adults, as I said before. An article in the New York Times in 1988 says, "The production has never pretended to offer adults equal time. Teachers and parents appear only incidentally and never without youngsters. Camera levels are set to adolescence height, and the school principal, Mr. Lawrence, is referred to, but never appears." This is true. I never mentioned Mr. Lawrence, but he's great. He makes an announcement over the loudspeaker in almost every episode. It's easy to overlook it, but they're fun to pick out because they often summarize the thesis of the episode in some way.
Attention, students. This is your principal, Mr. Lawrence speaking. Our thought for the day is brotherhood. remember, despite all our in-house squabbles, it's what keeps the family of mankind living under the same roof.
Degrassi Junior High and its sequel series, Degrassi High, would be the blueprint on which other teen dramas would build. They popularized the idea of showing teenagers' lives as they were, choosing to present them without judgment or moralizing. Linda Schuyler said, "Often the kids don't want to talk to their parents about their problems, even if their parents do. What we're trying to do is fill the gap. It's not our job to tell kids what's right or wrong. What we're trying to do is to present these really tough situations to them so that they'll be better informed when they have to make their own decisions." Shows like Skins and Euphoria would follow in this vein, attempting to meet teens on their own turf, showing their lives as complicated, messy, and not easily put into boxes. I hope to get to talk more about Degrassi again. This video was a beast to tackle. I didn't get to talk about even half of the things I had to say, but hopefully this gives you a clearer picture of Degrassi Junior High at least, and how it paved the way for later series. I absolutely love this garbage show, from the early days to the later seasons of The Next Generation and even Next Class. While I was working on this video, they announced a reunion of some of the Next Generation cast for the 20th anniversary, so maybe that will give me an excuse to talk about that series. Until then, y'all, thanks for liking and subscribing. You have all been so wonderful and supportive. Let me know what kind of video you want to see next in the comments, and until next time, I hope you have a great day.
Everybody wants something, they'll never give up. Everybody wants something, they'll take your money and never give up.